Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the world's 8.9 millionth podcast about Game of Thrones. No, I'm just kidding. We will not talk Game of Thrones final season here. We are talking about
Maybe
the
a little.
maybe a little. BC Poly Hot Stove. We are back for another week. Look, I was looking at the In the House podcast feed, great podcast with Rob Shaw and Mike Smith. They haven't put one out since like April or since March 31st. These guys are taking like all of April off. What's going on here? Not us. Even when the politicians aren't in the ledge, Maclean and I are here talking
Week
politics.
in, week out, just like the work of government doesn't end when we're not sitting in the legislature. We're still here. I am actually in the legislature, and hello from sunny and beautiful Victoria.
Exactly. He's Maclean K, editor-in-chief of The Orca. I'm Jordan Bateman, vice president communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, the mighty ICBA. All right, well, front burner politics, issue number one, an issue near and dear to this old tax fighter's heart, Maclean. I feel like I've talked about this every year for 1,000 years. Gas prices.
Well, this is your issue. I want to let you talk about it, but it's the issue right now in BC. There's nothing else at the moment.
Oh, exactly. And I do enjoy watching John Horgan be absolutely filleted by Vaughn Palmer. I think it's 3 days in a row Palmer's written about gas prices. Day one was, essentially beating Horgan up for saying that they should do something, but, not actually doing anything. Day two was, oh, wait, Horgan used to be suggesting things to do, but let's go back. Oh, no, he's wrong. He couldn't do that. And, now he's has the levers of power, and he could do the things that he said he was going to do in opposition, but it turns out those are bad things to do. And then, or maybe that was day three. Day two was not. It's funny, right? Because the bottom line here is for the environmental wing of the NDP and the Green Party, their stated bold goal is to price people out of their gasoline cars through taxation. They want the highest gas prices possible to move us out. And now that we're actually into this world where, we're $1.73 a liter, they're starting to get nervous.
Well, it's to quote the Emperor Napoleon: "If you decide to take Vienna, then take Vienna." And this is you're 100% right in that this is the stated goal of a lot of carbon pricing plans, is that the idea is to make it progressively more expensive so that people start progressively making the choice to not use their car and either walk or take a bike or transit. And it's just happening very, very quickly. And of course, the problem with starving people into submission is you have to watch them starve into submission. And there's a lot of hand waving on social media about people whining about the price of gas. But for people that don't have any choice but to drive to work or school or whatever, this is real pain. And that's for a government that has prided itself on prioritizing affordability. If you're a suburban commuter, this is the furthest thing from affordability imaginable.
Yeah, and look, the funny thing is, Horgan has tried a number of tacks on this, on this. But look, all of them have fallen flat. First, he kind of says, well, there's a federal election coming up. Those guys should be nervous about this. Well, sorry, sir. Of the 55 cents a liter in gas taxes, okay, I think there's a 10-cent federal excise tax. And then there is the GST that's charged on top of all other taxes, which is really where Horgan should be going after. He should be saying, it's ridiculous that we pay a tax on a tax, but, he doesn't. I don't know why he doesn't go to that easy line. So that didn't work. Then he talked about how, we should build more refineries. Yeah, where, John? Where in this province are you going to allow a refinery to be built? And where in this province can we do it without the protesters, the American-funded environmental interests? Give me a break. Like David Black's been talking about the Kitimat one for years and years. You can't get an answer on it. Come on, that's crazy. Then he, says, Trans Mountain wouldn't help. That is also demonstrably false. Trans Mountain isn't just twinning a pipeline for bitumen. It's increasing the efficiency of the current pipeline by 30%, and that opens it up for more refined fuels to flow. Then he says, it's not taxes. It's gouging by the gas companies. His own government studied all this many times. Other governments studied it. It's not price gouging. It is supply and demand, and when you don't have enough supply coming in. So all these kind of taxes have fallen flat, and I think the Premier is feeling more and more heat on this, especially since he needs to hold suburban ridings where there is no, or very poor transit like Maple Ridge and Surrey and other places.
Well, you're exactly right, and as one of the things Vaughn pointed out is that it's very difficult for the premier to, simultaneously blame both Alberta and the oil companies, and I guess Ottawa too, while also in the same breath sort of demanding that they rescue, I guess, us. At a certain point, it does kind of it falls flat, and it's sort of indicative of the way this NDP government, I should say, has treated some of its issues management. The strategy seems to be say that they're working on it and keep kicking the can down the road. And we've seen this in a number of files. And at a certain point, when people are, hurting at the pumps now, and the only reasonable expectation is that the prices are going to go up more and more this summer, and that's regardless of whatever Jason Kenney does with the taps. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
And Jason Kenney doesn't even have to, quote unquote, turn off the taps and risk that whole court challenge. Kenney's office, the energy minister, has the power to determine what goes into those pipes. So he can just say, oh, I'm sorry, we have a whole bunch of bitumen or whatever, XYZ product that needs to go through those pipes. And I'm sorry, that's going to take up all the capacity. We can't send any refined fuels down from Edmonton. We can't send any unrefined oil in order to go to the U.S. Cherry Point and whatnot. I'm sorry, gosh darn it. We just have this surplus. We got to sell this other stuff. And that, very credible people now are talking about $2 a liter gas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that far off. I mean, what we're paying now, it's not inconceivable. And I mean, you're exactly right. There's been a lot of hand waving saying, well, Alberta can't do it. It would be unconstitutional. And even if that is true, as you say, there are a number of sort of ways that the Alberta could get around it. And again, the strategy is not to do it permanently. The strategy is to do it for a short period of time to, teach us a lesson, I guess, is one way of putting it. And so it doesn't have to work for a long time. There's all kinds of, shenanigans and things like you just described that could very well work for, a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, while the lawyers argue about it in court. And again, if you're Alberta, that's the end game right there. David Eby is probably right when he says that explicitly shutting off oil to British Columbia to punish us would be unconstitutional. Great. Court cases aren't resolved in a day.
But if David Eby is right about that, then he is wrong about saying that we have the right to stop them from flowing things.
Well, you're 100% right there as well. But let's not let things like consistency enter into this.
I've been thinking about this quite a bit, Maclean, because now we've kicked the can down the road. I think it's to June 18th now is the decision date for federal cabinet on Trans Mountain. Mm-hmm. My thought on this is if you were Jason Kenney and you're trying to maximize the amount of pain and the amount of time it will take to have your maybe unconstitutional ban or a pipe turning off law overturned, you do it on the Friday afternoon of Canada Day weekend. It's Friday, Friday the 28th. You have a press conference. You make a big show of it. You wrap yourself literally maybe in a Canadian flag. You say it is un-Canadian what John Horgan is doing. I don't blame British Columbians. I blame one man, John Horgan, for this. He's acting anti-Canadian. We can no longer stand. We can't let Trans Mountain delay any longer. We have the decision from federal cabinet, and John Horgan's made comments this week that he's not going to abide by what the Prime Minister of this great country has to say. Blah blah blah. Therefore, we are going to turn off the taps tonight, and then that's Saturday, that's Sunday, that's holiday Monday. Courts don't sit. And judges don't like to kind of rush in from long weekend vacations. So the earliest you might get it is Tuesday. Probably not. Probably Chief Justice rolls into town Tuesday morning and is like, oh, I guess we got to deal with this. All right, I'll put it on this guy's docket for Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. Mm-hmm. Before you know it, a week has gone by. It's just my thought.
Well, you're right. I mean, and that doesn't even take into account whatever stalling tactics Kenny's lawyers come up with, which I'm sure will be creative. So, I mean, the situation you outline is, probably being at least, tossed around in Edmonton right now. So, I mean, as someone who lives in British Columbia and doesn't want gas to get a whole lot more expensive, I hope that doesn't happen. But it is at the very least plausible.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you fill up as regularly as you can, and come visit me in Langley. You can get cheaper gas in Aldergrove or go across the line to the United States. All right, gas prices. We're going to hear a lot more about this indeed. Now, I kind of scooped you there. David Black. I read this piece by Jack Knox this morning in the Times Columns. I thought it was a good reminder of poor Black. He's just sitting there. He just wants to build a clean refinery, and no one will let him.
He's kind of taken an interesting tack, it's one that we don't usually see in BC, which is kind of just sit quietly and do things the right way and try not to offend anyone and see if that works. And, it's worth a try. But, in all the things that John Horgan has said, we might help alleviate rising gas prices. He did actually specifically mention refining capacity either here or in Alberta. Well, David Black has a proposal and wants to build a refinery. And we did touch on this. It's let's be honest, it's not going to get built. There's no way. There is simply no way that they are going to do that.
We should laugh, Maclean. We should laugh, Maclean. But come on, can you imagine? In what world? I can't even imagine the BC Liberal government letting this thing be built. These guys, the left will set their hair on fire. It'd be insane.
Well, I mean, the Greens are already beside themselves with LNG, and if Trans Mountain happens, it's simply not going to happen. Whether it be a good idea or not is beside the point. It's not going to happen under this government. It's probably not going to happen under the next government. But hey, if the premier is saying that more refining capacity might help, there is a proposal that's been sitting on his desk for, I'd say as long as he's been premier.
Sign off, John. Sign off. Sorry, I'm trying to picture that world where we ever see a refinery built in this province. I mean, it boggles the mind.
That world was 1983.
That world was 1983. All right. Back burner issue. We are headed into the final month of sittings for the BC legislature. I'm consulting my calendar here in my office. They sit next week and the week after that, and we have that, and then they take Victoria Day week off and then come back for one more.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
I don't think they go into June. So we're down to 4 weeks of sittings left. They are running out of time to do the crazy activist things that NDP governments love to do. We're hearing a lot of rumors in the employment community and a lot of concern around a review they're doing of WorkSafe. This wouldn't be legislation. This would be a review of WorkSafe. The only thing they've announced about the review of WorkSafe BC is that they're doing one. And they've selected, forgive me, I forget her name, but she is a very prominent, high-profile BC Federation of Labor-friendly lawyer who has previously written papers for the Fed shredding WorkSafe BC. WorkSafe BC, by the way, considered basically the gold standard of workers' compensation boards across Canada, a group that other provinces look to for having balance between employer and worker rights. Generally they've got it right. Look, are they sitting on giant surplus? Yeah, should they give it back to employers? Sure, but by and large they get this thing right. Now, though, you're about to see the Harry Baineses of the world. I saw Bob Mackin reporting that Harry Baines is at a big fundraiser shortly, put together by the BC Federation of Labor. Interesting, the people lobbying him, raising money for him. In the old days, Gary Mason would have gone crazy on this, but that only counts for BC Liberal and conservative politicians. Gary Mason actually loves his crazy lefties. Anyways, all that to say, we are expecting some, I guess, definition as to what this review is. Is it going to be narrow? Is it going to be broad in scope? That is coming down. And then there's also some labor code reviews. You'll recall there was a tribunal that looked at labor code. They generally, there was good and bad from an employer point of view in what they looked at. But and this is, I think, what you want to talk about, very famously or very interestingly, that tribunal split 2-1 to keep something that the NDP consider absolutely abhorrent, the secret ballot.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's one of those issues that I think if you're not sort of in the NDP bubble, you find perplexing that we're even talking about. And we're talking about to be certified as a union, typically there is a secret ballot vote, because of course there's a secret ballot vote. This is Canada. The NDP want to move to card check system, which is basically, I'm going to oversimplify it, but it's basically a room where everyone who votes yes raises their hand, and everyone who doesn't raise their hand gets the stink eye. And
yeah, it's actually not even that. It's you can actually go and pick people off individually. And so what happens is the union will go out and stand in front of your house, stand on your kid's soccer field, make it very clear, completely with no accountability as to what kind of consequences you might face in your work environment if you don't sign the card. It's really ugly and completely, frankly, unregulated. Whereas the secret ballot, you have I forget, it's the Labor Relations Bureau, I believe, that actually come and administer the vote. There's very strict rules as to what the employers can talk about, what the unions can talk about. They give you the information, you get the vote. Much like Elections BC manages the elections we all vote in, there is this third party. But with the card check, that ceases really to exist, and the unions love it because they can kind of make it very uncomfortable for their brothers and sisters if they don't sign.
This, as an issue aside, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here in the legislature, because it's apparently one of those issues where the Greens have, and again, I'm going to say apparently, drawn a line in the sand and told the NDP no. I've been told by Green staff. Well, yes, the sands may shift. Yep. There's a dangerous tongue twister. But as recently as Christmas, I was being told by the Greens, rather, that this had been brought up behind the scenes, and the Greens said no. We'll vote it down, so don't try it. I discussed this at some length, actually, with Andrew Weaver in our Christmas wrap-up interview, and he said, of course we should have a secret ballot, although he did give some qualifications, saying it might make more sense to do a card check system if they were all spread across different work sites. But still on principle supports a secret ballot. He just, in his professorial way can entertain the opposing argument and so on and so forth. Yeah, that does sound like there's a bit of wiggle room. Now, I would argue there was probably the good news is the Greens are less inclined to give way to the NDP than they were even 6 months ago, because they haven't gotten their way on things like LNG and Site C and proportional representation. They see a greater need to differentiate themselves. And for whatever his other strengths and weaknesses, Andrew Weaver is actually pretty strong on the Labour file. He got into some sparring matches with the BCTF during the election campaign, and I think they will hold strong on this, but we shall see.
Yes, we shall see. Weaver's kind of said for certain industries, i.e. construction, which of course the industry ICBA is in, I would imagine food, retail would be other ones that maybe those workers, but you can't be a little bit pregnant, right? Like, either a secret ballot is important and fair because it safeguards the process and gives people the democratic right to make their choice known without intimidation, or go for the free-for-all. This thing that you could do it in the middle is really bad form, because why should a crane operator have less of a right to a democratic cornerstone like a secret ballot than a QP, a Langley Township worker, for example? No, of course not. They should have the absolute same rights. And I'm going to let you in on a secret. We work with lots of construction companies. They often manage to get all the people in the room together. It's the most amazing thing. And if there is a vote, that can easily be and has been easily accommodated many times. I always think about this, and I always think unions should be careful what they wish for, because we often talk about how this is for certification votes. It's also for decertification votes, but it's also for votes to switch unions. And the labor movement often fractures. They all hated the BC nurses once because they raided some group and one of the other ones. So it does open you up to raids from your own things. And when you consider the fact that unionism is becoming a thinner and thinner slice of the pie in this province, outside of government, those unions, it's just as easy to go after that red meat that's already been proven to be open to unionization.
Yeah, I could not agree more with everything you just said, which is, not always the case with you and I. But all of that aside, I fear for the NDP that this is one of those issues, actually much like ride sharing, where their take and their stance is kind of out of step with what I think fairly safely is the majority of public opinion in this province. I don't think you could take a random sample of British Columbians and say, do you think a secret ballot is unimportant? Of course it's important. Yeah. Do you want ride sharing? Yes, there are some objections, but I think the overwhelming majority of British Columbians say, yeah, we should have it because it's, the rest of the world does. And so the NDP's sort of qualifications in that, as with any government, eventually they're going to have to fall in line with public will. Yes,
no, you're exactly right. And the BC NDP, look, they keep going back to the 90s playbook. The 90s didn't end great for them, right? They were wiped out for 16 years. And it's because they brought in a ton of red tape, a ton of taxes, and went to war with the business community, the employers in this province. They ended up having to retract certain pieces of legislation because the public backlash became so intense. A lot of what they did was reversed in the 01 new era of Gordon Campbell. So, they need to be careful. Like, why stir up the hornet's nest of the, Business Council of BC? I mean, look, the ICBA hornet's nest, we're already stirred up. There's no doubt about that. But, stirring it up with the BC Chamber of Commerce and the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. And by the way, congratulations to Ian Black on his new role and leaving the Board of Trade. He's done a marvelous job there. He was only really wrong. He was only really wrong a couple of times, Maclean. Number one, on the translink tax. And Hamish Marshall's going to be upset I called it a transit tax because the rule is we call it the translink tax. I'm sorry, Hamish. And number two, he was some of the grades he gave NDP budgets were ridiculous. Yeah. But I've chided him for both, so it's all right.
Yeah, well, and the point you're making, though, is that people like Ian Black and the Board of Trade have tried to play nice.
Yeah.
And so, going out of your way to antagonize them there's no point.
Yeah. And, union-only bidding has really, started to unify the business community. There's a number of other things that they've done. So it'll be very interesting to see what they roll out in these next few weeks. The problem is they've got a Labour minister who's an ideologue. Harry Baines, grew up. He's his main role. I'm not even sure what his real job used to be, but he was essentially the chief negotiator for one of Canada's largest unions. That's his baby. That's what he believes in. And you look at the rest of cabinet. They come from one of two places. They come from the public service, or working for the NDP on the side, or they come from the union movement. There aren't any small business owners. There aren't any, ununionized people in the NDP, and so I think they end up drinking their own bathwater a bit and not realize that the world has completely changed.
Agreed. And speaking of playing nice, or rather not playing nice, let's talk about who's hot and who's not in BC politics.
Who's hot and who's not in, well, let's expand it in all politics, but I'll start with the BC guy. Who's hot? Maple Ridge Mayor, and I apologize, I had to look up his name, Mike Morden. Mayor Mike I think he's winning this fight against John Horgan over social housing. So Maple Ridge has had this camp for a long time of homeless people called Anita Place, which is one of the great puns.
Fantastic branding.
Yeah, outstanding. So Anita Place. The NDP solution is to build some housing. They call it supportive housing, 51 units. Unfortunately, the location is very close to a number of other Maple Ridge services that people value. Even more unfortunately, it does not come along with the kind of 24/7 supportive services you would expect in a supportive service building. It comes with like one nurse who happens to be there a few hours a day as she's trying to balance, or he or she are trying to balance 3 other sites. Not great. Maple Ridge has already had some social housing built by the province previously. It has turned into a problem. There's a lot of crime proven out by stats around that. Nanaimo has had one of these supportive buildings. Leonard Krog, former NDP MLA, has said that, look, there's a big crime problem around this thing. Just released the stats to prove it. They're a little bit of trouble. But here's what Mike Morden has done. Maple Ridge is essentially split into 2 swing ridings. They were BC Liberal. Both of them now are NDP. And he has a petition of 10,000 Maple Ridge residents have signed in his back pocket. And you can just feel the sweat pouring down the brow of Lisa Bear and Bob Deeth as they, as their cabinet or their colleagues in caucus look at them and say, how are you going to hold these 2 ridings? And John Horgan has dealt them a pretty bad hand.
And I mean, you may correct me or take me up on this, but I would say that when this issue started to turn for the NDP is you touched on this, and that's the crime stats. Look, I don't think it's controversial to suggest. I live a block and a half from a supportive housing site, and we do get a little more crime than does the average neighborhood in Victoria. We get break-ins, we get people using our parkade as a toilet and a place to shoot up, and again, like this is just part of life. So to suggest that crime is in no way affected by these facilities is simply untrue. It's not a value statement. And you can still support having them there. But to dismiss concerns and argue with the RCMP and the most NDP-friendly mayor maybe in the province, in Leonard Krog, is where people have started to look at the NDP and specifically the minister, Selena Irresponsible, cross-eyed, saying, well, that what you just said is not true.
Did you just call her
And
Selena
so,
responsible? That was awesome.
did I
I'm going to
call
call her
Selena responsible?
Selena irresponsible. That's my little Trumpism for the day.
That the slip of the tongue. Selena Robinson is her name, the
Yes,
minister
and she is
responsible.
responsible. Selena irresponsible. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
I think it was easy for the NDP up until then to paint people objecting to this as, bigots and people who didn't care about poor people and the mentally ill. But when the facts are no longer on their side, which is the case with the crime stats, that's when I think even reasonable people will say, well, hey, hold on.
Yeah. And when a community
If
of
there's
roughly,
no problem, why are you arguing with the RCMP?
yeah, and when a community of roughly 75,000 people generate a petition of 10,000, that is red alert.
Yeah,
Mr.
that's
Premier, I know you
astonishing.
love Star Trek. Shields up, red alert.
Yeah.
Jettison the core.
75,000 total. That's not 75,000 voters. I mean, that's
No,
amazing.
Yes, it is quite a thing. I'm not sure how they kind of wriggle out of it because he's put everything into this too, and I think I'm going to tell you. Let me tell the folks watching who are from urban areas and rural areas a little bit about suburban life. I live in Langley, suburban community. I live in Walnut Grove, very suburban part of Langley. The number one thing that there's two reasons why you move to suburbia as compared to living in an urban area. Number one is you want a little bit more space, and number two is you feel like you're safer. So when urban issues and I'm using urban issues with quotation marks if you're listening to this, when urban issues like crime start to seep into suburban neighborhoods, my God, Maclean, the news spreads like you wouldn't believe. In our community, and I imagine Maple Ridge has the same, we have a series of different Facebook pages. There's the Walnut Grove Community Group. There's our James Kennedy Community Group for the little school that we're nearby. There's 3 or 4 that we're all listed in. And if a lawnmower goes missing, it's on the Facebook page. If a bike goes missing, it's on the Facebook page. If a treatment house moves into part of the neighborhood, an unregulated treatment house, that's in there. If I've seen pictures of shady characters, wearing hoodies and whatnot, that is in there. In our previous neighborhood in Langley, someone posted these pictures. They had, and we were all watching for these 2 characters in hoodies. Turns out they were Abbotsford cops surveilling a potential gang member. They begged us to leave them alone. Because the whole neighborhood was on top of these poor cops who were just doing their job. So suburbia, crime is the number one thing that gets talked about in these groups. It drives people crazy. When a new transit facility is built, extending a transit line, this is one of the things that, I'm not sure Surrey Council's really talked about as far as SkyTrain goes. There'll be discussions everywhere the station is in those neighborhoods. Is it worth the crime that will come with it? It is a natural thing for suburban folks to talk about, and it spreads like wildfire online. And I just don't know how you put that toothpaste back in the tube. You can give them all the stats you want, fake or not. The perception changes.
I think the only realistic climb down for the NDP on this is to actually go. I was going to say double down, but that's not quite true. Is kind of admit that what they call the 24/7 wraparound supports are not quite that. I think they're going to have to, because you're right, they can't back down on the facility itself. So what they need to do is put a ton more resources into the supports there, and try and ameliorate some of the problems that are going to come. I think that is going to be where they go, but I mean, again, it will come at the expense of contradicting themselves. Not that that's been a problem for them before. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Your hotness is a piece. Your hotness. Your hot stuff is an interesting piece that I just read. And man, God, I wish I could write like Rex Murphy.
I mean, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, you don't have to agree with Rex Murphy to admire his writing. But so his I think third piece is live on the orca.ca today. I encourage you to read it. Rex Murphy writes like Rex Murphy, only Rex Murphy writes. And I can tell you from having the privilege of having spoken to him on a few occasions, that's actually what he sounds like too. The man is a very gifted speaker and writer. I encourage you to read it. It's about the effects of Jason Kenney's win on BC, but also on Justin Trudeau's climate plan. And again, you don't have to agree with it to marvel at the way it's written. And he makes excellent points. I'm going to throw another wild card in there too in terms of hot. Is that tonight one of our another Orca contributor, our very own Daniel Marshall, this evening at UBC will be receiving the Basil Stewart Stubbs Prize for outstanding outstanding work for a historical piece in British Columbia. I look forward to reading Daniel's pieces every other Saturday. There's another one coming up this Saturday. And if Daniel, if you're listening, congratulations, man. You've earned it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love his passion, especially for the gold rush. I live in Langley, near Fort Langley. Gold rush was pivotal for our little community. It's incredible to read his stories. And yes, well-deserved indeed.
It's quite a roster of Orca writers.
That's right. It's a great roster, and then me.
And then there's us.
Cold, and I can't be happier to report this. Maybe Bill Thielman's slightly happier than me. Proportional representation has gone down to defeat in yet another province. It was expected to pass, but it failed. Congratulations, Prince Edward Island. You have dodged the prop rep bullet one more time. Kudos to you folks for having the reasonable common sense to reject this electoral reform idea. And shame on you, prop rep supporters. You failed again, as you failed constantly on this file. I have no doubt, though, you'll go try to peddle your wares in another poor province. And I sincerely hope you fail there as well.
Well, and it's the same, it seems to be the same sort of small cadre of campaigners that sort of migrate like a caravan from province to province while these campaigns are going on. There is no
brotherhood without
groundswell.
banners, off they go.
Right? There's no local groundswell for proportional representation anywhere in Canada. And they came a lot closer in Prince Edward Island than they did here. But I mean, and I also, I mean, let's be fair. They did a couple things in Prince Edward Island better than they did here, such as holding the referendum in conjunction with the provincial election. Smart. They narrowed the choices down to a single system of proportional representation. I think mixed member. Smart. However, they also made some very familiar mistakes, including, and I think most crucially, punting the details until after the referendum, including, such things as how many MLAs will I have, which is the kind of thing that where the people who advocate for proportional representation seem to think that doesn't matter. What's important is that you feel more represented. PR is obviously better for you, so why are you sweating the details? It's like reading the ingrrients in your daily vitamins. Why? Why? What does it matter? And so this is again where they got. I have a story coming out later today on sort of some observations from the PEI election, and not to scoop myself, but I mean, even the referendum commissioner in Prince Edward Island was quoted saying, yeah, there's I think his way of putting it was there's not enough meat on these bones. He couldn't answer these basic questions because they hadn't been fully articulated yet. It was a way of saying, well, they'll figure it out after you vote for it. And it's just. It's not. It is reasonable to say, even if you believe in principle that proportional representation might be worth trying somewhere, that yeah, maybe these details are important, and hand waving these away as fear mongering is driving away reasonable people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, was that an election commissioner, or referendum commissioner? Was he a neutral arbiter?
I think in this case he actually was. Yeah. So that's another thing they did better than we did here in British Columbia. So.
Yes. And we should not ever lose sight of the fact that David Eby completely fumbled that file from start to finish, stacked the deck to try to get the result he wanted, which was a win for Prop Rep. Still couldn't deliver, and I'm sure the Premier's office has not forgotten that either. Okay.
Well, and one last thing I'm going to throw on that. In exactly the same way that the BC Liberals have Wild West as I think it was a New York Times headline thrown in their faces, I think the NDP are going to have to wear Canada's least honest attempt at electoral reform from now until, well, people get tired of talking about it.
Exactly. It's another case of the EBGBs coming to BC politics. All right. Cold. Oh, my least favorite transportation minister of all time, and there have been some duds, let me tell you. But here she is. Maclean, you're cold.
Well, I mean, Claire Trevena, the transportation minister.
How is she still transportation minister? How has she not been shuffled out yet?
Well, there hasn't been any opportunity. There's been no shuffles at all, actually,
this summer,
which is unusual.
Winter is coming.
This would be the logical time to do it. Any shuffle, that is, not specifically Minister Trevena. Look, one of the things that I'm setting aside all the other things we could talk about, like ride sharing, like the Massey Tunnel replacement. These are legitimate concerns. I'm not dismissing any of them, but the reason we're talking about her today is where I live, in the southern half of Vancouver Island. There's been a urgent and glaring need to at least come up with some solutions for the gridlock here, especially with the Malahat Highway, which extends north from Victoria up towards Nanaimo. It's when there are accidents, the whole thing can get shut down and the island gets paralyzed. So this was one of those things the NDP said were a victim of BC Liberal neglect, and they would get immediately on it. Well, we're 2 years into the mandate, and this week, Minister Trevena announced another study. Now, the reason that this would ordinarily not even be worth noting, but this last week, John Horgan announced, I can't remember the number, but millions of improvements for the highway in his riding, extending west from Langford and Greater Victoria out towards Souk, which was also needed. So it's a good thing. But he thought so little of this, South Island transportation strategy that he didn't even hold off. He wanted this announcement for his riding, and he doesn't care if it's included in a wider South Island transportation strategy. So, in other words, her plan, which I think is just another way of stalling because there are no good answers, was not important enough to him politically to, include. They could have easily said, yes, we have a South Island transportation strategy. Look at these millions we're investing in out the way to Souk. No, this is separate. So, unfortunately, Minister Trevena is going to have to own the failure to improve or expand or give options to the Malahat. And I think they're hoping that this will just get stalled out until the next election and we'll kind of collectively forget about it.
Yes, we'll be seeing it, Trevena, I think on the unemployment lines. Anyways, it's funny, right? So another study on that. I think she ordered the 165th and 166th studies on the Massey Tunnel. They love to punt. They love to just love to rag the puck.
Yeah, well, and it's like this is a good bookend from where we started this conversation about the gas prices. That's basically what we're going to monitor this summer. That is a great way of saying we're going to rag the puck. And I think in no file have they done this more than in transportation.
Yeah. You know who's not going to rag the puck, Maclean? The Columbus Blue Jackets when they defeat Bob Price's stupid Boston Bruins. As hard as it was for me, it was almost like watching Trump versus Clinton. I don't know who to cheer for, Leafs versus Bruins. At one point, I was cheering for the referees. At another point, I was cheering for like a power failure at the arena. But, the Leafs are gone, and now Columbus is going to come in and finish the job for us poor West Coasters who loathe both Boston and Toronto. And I don't care what Bob Price says. It's un-Canadian to like the Boston Bruins. It's not right.
Un-Canadian to like there's no Canadian teams left. It's un-Vancouver fan to like Boston Bruins, and I'll give you that.
The Bruins?
But as a fan of the Calgary Flames, I have a hard time cheering.
They stole our Stanley Cup. Okay. Anyways, that is it for us.
I feel the same way about John Tortorella, which is why I'm having a hard time cheering for Columbus.
But Torts has changed. He's like John Horgan. He's a kinder, gentler Torts now. he shed Hulk. Hulk Horgan is gone. We have the kinder, gentler Torts.
We talked about this on Twitter this morning. Jody Vance said she's going to cheer for the Islanders because there's a local boy on the team. And you know what? That's a good reason to cheer for a team. I'm just going to cheer for overtimes and Game 7s.
St. Louis Blues have the most Canadians, so if you want to go that way. I actually really like Colorado because, man, that Nathan McKinnon, what a beast.
Yeah.
And
he took over the series against my Flames. He was dominant.
Yeah, he was unstoppable. And local boy Tyson Barrie for you on that team, Victoria.
That's right. Happy to see him do well. And so, I'm just cheering for good games at this point.
Yeah, no, it's been I went 2 for 8 on my predictions for the first round. I'm like, hey, not bad. I was actually.
You're probably in the upper echelon. I mean, all the division winners lost. So
I went to a minor hockey executive meeting last night, and so the association's head coach is there, and he's like, Carolina scores. Just go, shoot. I went 1 for 8. I'm like, hey, I'm twice as smart about hockey as you are, buddy. Not bad.
I would love to see anyone who actually picked Columbus to beat Tampa Bay. That's
not bad at all. Okay, before we go, Maclean, are you watching Game of Thrones? Are you up to date?
Oh yes,
okay.
All the way.
So you and I, should we do a little death draft for this week?
Oh, like right now?
Right now. I'll let you have the first pick, and then I'll take picks 2 and 3, and let's do 3 rounds, and we'll do pick 3 each.
Okay, so we're picking people that will die.
This week. They will die this week on the show.
Pick number 1, my first round draft pick, is Podrick Payne.
Podrick Payne, wow.
Well, he got to sing that sad song.
Yeah, Podrick Payne. You've made a horrible mistake because the number 1 person who's going to die this week is Theon Greyjoy. I'm going to let you in on a little secret here, Maclean. If I have to protect the most important thing in civilization, I'm not calling Theon!
No, you mean Reek.
Oh, dear God. Snake draft here, so I'm going to take the third pick, and then you'll get 2 in a row. I'm going to take... I kind of want to take Sir Brienne, but I love her so much. This is where your heart really gets in the way, because you just love all these characters. Oh, I know who I'm going to take. Lord Varys.
Oh, that's a good one.
He's going to be devoured. Are you ready for this? He's going to be in the crypt, because it's safe in the crypt, as I've heard. But he's going to get devoured by the bones of Ned Stark.
That is entirely possible. Hey, anything to get Sean Bean another acting job. I'm happy with that. I'm going to go with Grey Worm as number 4.
Oh, no.
He's totally dying. He's totally. They even had the, I'm 2 days away from retirement.
It's like, Grey Worm, don't say it. Don't do it,
He's
Grey
Danny
Worm.
Glover.
Oh,
he's Danny Glover.
He's dead.
I'm not wrong.
No,
and so for my next pick, I have to pick one of the major characters.
Okay.
And so I am going to say Tyrion Lannister.
Oh no!
Like there has to be one oh my God, right? And none of the people we picked so far, I think, are in that category. So there has to be one.
Oh, that would be. I'm not ready for this. I know. Okay, I've got the final pick. So you have Podrick Payne, Grey Worm, and the Hand of the Queen, Tyrion Lannister. I have Lord Varys, Theon Greyjoy, and all right. So if we're gonna go big characters, I got to go big.
Yeah, one big character.
Do you count the big woman as a big character?
Brienne?
Yeah.
She's big with an asterisk, but I'll give it to you.
See, I kind of think Tyrion's going to get saved by Bronn. Bronn's going to show up with that crossbow.
Oh, it's true.
At the right moment.
What about Jaime? Jaime feels like his redemption arc is complete.
But don't you think
Jaime
has
to kill Cersei?
Yeah, don't you think Jaime has to kill Cersei?
Well, there's no has to in Game of Thrones. That's what makes it so great, right?
I know. Okay, I will say... That's going to totally weed her out, be like, Beric Dondarrion. Fine, I'll take the big woman. Sir Brienne of Tarth, arise. Yeah. But both Tormund, Giant Spain, and I will weep, and we will sing a lament for Sir Brienne of Tarth.
And Tormund will still hit on zombie Sir Brienne.
Yeah. All right, and Maclean, let's do one person guaranteed to live. Go for it.
Oh, Jon Snow.
Jon Snow.
We can't do that yet.
I'm taking the Hound because he's got to go down and kill the mountain for me.
Okay.
All right, there you go. Next week, we will see how we did. And until then, watch more stuff. I think Jody and George have a much better podcast than we have called The Middle. Is it called The Middle? What do they call it?
Unspun.
It's even got a better name than ours. So go and watch them. They'll be up later today.
That's right. You've just listened to the rest. Now watch the best.
Exactly. And I'm going to try to have an earpiece that works next week. That doesn't keep popping out here, so you don't have to watch me on the YouTube's constantly fidgeting with my ear.
Unplugged with Jordan Bateman.
That's right. It is unplugged. All right. At the Orca BC on Twitter, Facebook.com/theorcabc. Thanks for watching and for reading and for putting up with our nonsense. We appreciate it.